You've been told Stoicism is serious, cold, all about emotionless statues and stiff upper lips. But that's not the truth. Real Stoicism? It's weird, wild, a little absurd, and it might just be exactly what your overthinking mind has been searching for. Because while the world shouts at you to hustle harder, do more, be more, the Stoics quietly trained themselves to laugh at life's chaos, to smile through misfortune, to practice death in the morning and eat burnt toast at night without a single complaint. You've been taught to fear discomfort, avoid failure, hide your pain behind filters and smiles. But what if you could flip that script? What if peace came not from escaping the absurd, but from embracing it? Tonight you're going to hear Stoic lessons so strange they sound made up, but they're real and they work. Lessons that teach you how to talk back to your thoughts in a ridiculous accent, how to train your mind using a rotten fish, how to become immune to praise with the help of a talking onion, and somehow, through all the absurdity, your mind will start to settle. The pressure will melt off your chest. The storm in your thoughts will go quiet, and for the first time in a long time, you'll feel still. Because in this madness, you'll find something sacred, not logic, not perfection, but peace. This isn't just another sleep video. This is mental jiu-jitsu disguised as bedtime stories. And when you wake up tomorrow, you won't be the same. You'll be softer, stronger, a little stranger, and a lot more free. Ready to let go? Let's begin. So let's start where nobody wants to begin, with losing. Not the kind of loss that's posted online with a silver lining and a motivational quote. Not the loss you pretend didn't happen so you can get back to pretending you're fine. We're talking about real loss, failure that stings, moments that make your chest feel heavy, your face go red, and your thoughts spiral. You felt it. Maybe it was when they said no to you, when everything fell apart, even though you did everything right, when someone else got the thing you worked for, or when you looked in the mirror and didn't like what you saw. But here's the twist. What if those moments weren't setbacks? What if they were training? Epictetus believed that losing on purpose wasn't just acceptable, it was powerful. Because if you want to become invincible, you don't train by stacking up wins. You train by falling on your face and choosing to get up without flinching. He didn't start as a philosopher. He started as a slave, beaten, owned, controlled, powerless. And yet, he became one of the most mentally free men in history, not because he ran from hardship, but because he let it hit him and didn't break. He would deliberately place himself in uncomfortable situations. He would challenge his assumptions. He would let himself look foolish, fail at things, be mocked, be dismissed, and instead of reacting with bitterness, he'd watch his own emotions like a scientist. Because here's what he understood. Losing is a mirror. It shows you who you really are underneath the surface. Success hides a lot. It makes you feel in control even when you're not. It strokes your ego, feeds your pride, and tells you you're untouchable. Until one day, you're not, and it all crashes, and you don't know how to handle it. But if you train for loss, if you let yourself experience it intentionally, you become someone the world can't shake. You stop living like a balloon in the wind, only floating when things go your way. You become the mountain. When Epictetus was mocked for walking with a limp, he didn't snap back. He laughed. Why? Because he had trained himself to not care. He had already accepted his limitations. He had already practiced losing his image, his pride, his comfort. And if you've already made peace with loss, you're free. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us are addicted to winning. We're addicted to being seen a certain way. We chase admiration like oxygen. We perform for praise. We fear disapproval like death, which means we're never actually in control. We're owned by the outcome. One harsh word ruins our day. One failure breaks our spirit. One rejection sends us spiraling. But the Stoic approach is different. It says, what if you walked into failure on purpose, with your eyes open? What if you spoke up knowing it might go badly, so you could train your tolerance for discomfort? What if you let someone misunderstand you, so you could get used to not needing validation? What if you pursued something hard and didn't get it, so you could teach your mind that failure isn't fatal, because it isn't. It's a teacher. And Epictetus knew, the faster you learn to lose, the faster you stop fearing it. He used to say, you become what you give your attention to. So if you give all your attention to outcomes, you become fragile. But if you give your attention to the process, the training, you become strong. And that's what losing on purpose does. It shifts your attention inward, to your character, to your effort, to your resilience. Not how people see you, not how many likes or wins or trophies you collect, but how steady you stay when everything goes wrong. It's about control, but not the kind you think. Not control over events, not control over people, but control over yourself. When you feel shame rise in your chest, when your ego screams at you to defend yourself, when your pride says, you can't let them treat you like that, you pause, you breathe, you let it pass through. That's power. You're not weak because you lost. You're strong because you didn't run from it. And here's the part nobody talks about. Winning all the time makes you soft. You stop taking risks. You start playing it safe. You hide your truth to keep your image intact. But losing, real, intentional loss, hardens your core, sharpens your mind, and cuts off the part of you that's addicted to approval. And once that part is gone, you start doing things for better reasons. You write that book even if no one reads it. You speak your truth even if it shakes your voice. You apply for the job even if you get rejected. You try the thing even if you're bad at it. Because now, the outcome doesn't own you. You own your effort. You own your intention. You own your response. And that's what makes you dangerous to failure. It can't touch someone who doesn't fear it. It can't humiliate someone who's already made peace with looking stupid. It can't break someone who doesn't need things to go perfectly. The goal isn't to lose for the sake of suffering. The goal is to expose yourself to it until it becomes familiar and stops having power over you. Epictetus called this voluntary hardship. Most people avoid pain at all costs. He walked toward it because he knew it would shape him faster than anything else. The pain of rejection, a chance to train your ego to loosen its grip. The sting of failure, a window into your patience and commitment. The discomfort of not being the best, a lesson in humility and long-term vision. The more you lose on purpose, the less you fear anything. And when you stop fearing failure, you become willing to attempt anything. That's when the real magic happens. Not just strength, but freedom. Because now, no one can manipulate you with rewards. No one can crush you with setbacks. No one can trap you in perfectionism or performance. You're grounded, rooted, unshakable, because you don't need to win to feel worthy. You've unhooked your self-worth from external success. You've trained it like a muscle in the gym of adversity, in the furnace of failure. You've replaced panic with patience, control with courage, image with integrity. So when life throws loss your way, you nod. You've been here before. You've practiced this. And instead of asking, why me? You say, let's begin. You stop trying to prove yourself, and you start building yourself from the inside out. That's what Epictetus did, and that's why we still talk about him. Not because he won the world's approval, but because he became the kind of person who didn't need it. That's the goal. And you can start today, not by chasing wins, but by choosing a small loss, a moment of discomfort, and letting it shape you instead of shame you. Because the truth is, there's no such thing as losing. When your purpose is growth, that's the philosophy, that's the path, that's the peace, and that's what makes you untouchable. So after learning how to lose on purpose and becoming untouchable by failure, what comes next? Let's go deeper, not darker, just weirder. Because now it's time to let go of something even more subtle than ego. Your attachments, not just to success, but to things, to objects, to comfort, to the silent grip of mine. There's a story passed down, quietly, almost like a joke, about Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, the philosopher, the man with the weight of an empire on his shoulders. And yet, in private, they say he'd walk through his palace and speak to his furniture, not because he was losing his mind, but because he was mastering it. The practice is called animism, the act of assigning personality, even life, to non-living things. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like superstition, but used correctly, it becomes one of the sharpest Stoic tools for detachment ever created. Here's how it works. You take something you own, anything, a mug, a pair of shoes, a pillow, and you give it a voice. You let it speak, not out loud maybe, but in your mind. You let it tell you, I'm not yours, I'm only passing through. That mug, it's chipped. That shoe, one rainy day away from being ruined. That couch, it will rot one day, be thrown out, burn, disappear. And now, instead of gripping it tighter, you nod, because you've just started the process of letting go. Marcus Aurelius knew how fast power could vanish. He'd seen kingdoms rise and fall, and so he trained his mind to never fall in love with possession. So what does this have to do with talking to your chair? Everything. Because the moment you give it a voice, you create distance. You break the illusion that objects are extensions of you. And most people, they don't realize how much they identify with their stuff. Their car becomes their status. Their clothes become their personality. Their phone becomes their comfort blanket. And when these things break, get scratched, stolen, lost, they don't just feel inconvenience. They feel pain, grief, loss. That's not freedom. That's silent imprisonment. So Marcus gave things voices. He trained his mind to hear the wisdom in what seemed lifeless. A robe saying, I will not always fit you. A goblet whispering, sooner or later, I will shatter. Even a throne reminding him, you only sit here because history allows it, for now. This wasn't madness, it was preparation. Because if something speaks to you, you listen. And once you hear it tell you the truth, you stop clinging. This practice isn't about pretending objects have souls. It's about confronting the soul you've given them, the meaning you've attached, the identity you've borrowed. And when you hear your coat tell you, I am not who you are, you start to feel lighter, strangely calm. Detachment isn't about pushing things away in anger. It's about loving them while they're here and being ready to let them go when they're not. That's what this teaches. It also sharpens awareness. You start to notice how your brain wraps itself around objects. You see the panic when you lose your phone, the sting when someone scratches your car, the embarrassment when your clothes don't match your image. But if you've already practiced letting those things speak to you, if they've already told you they're temporary, you can breathe, you can live. Because here's what's hiding underneath all this. We don't fear the loss of things. We fear the loss of control, the loss of image, the loss of identity. So when Marcus assigned personality to objects, he exposed the lie. He forced himself to feel the loss before it happened. He pre-broke the attachment. So when real loss came, he'd already let go. There's also something strange and powerful about treating objects with honor, not worship, not obsession, but presence. If your cup is speaking to you, you don't throw it around carelessly. If your pen says, "I help you shape thoughts," you stop chewing on it mindlessly. You become more intentional, more grateful, more aware. And that's the paradox. By giving things a voice, you quiet your own mind. You slow down. You take nothing for granted. You stop living like everything belongs to you and start living like everything is borrowed. That's the root of Stoic peace. Non-attachment, not by force, but by deep understanding. Because what if that lamp beside your bed has been silently saying goodbye for years and you just weren't listening? What if your shoes, your desk, your favorite jacket are just passing travelers, here to teach you about impermanence one day at a time? Now, when they're gone, you don't panic, you don't mourn, you thank them and keep walking. This even applies to objects with emotional weight. A gift, a keepsake, something that reminds you of someone you've lost. Let it speak. Let it tell you, "I hold their memory, but I am not them." Let it remind you that the love isn't in the object, it's in your heart, and that never leaves. Now, you can cherish the thing without becoming attached to it. That's freedom. And freedom from attachment is the birthplace of peace. You'll also start noticing how much your environment reflects your inner world. The clutter, the chaos, the excessive buying, they're not just about stuff, they're signals. So the Stoic practice becomes a conversation with your surroundings, with your mind. What is this object doing here? Why did I feel the need to buy it? What would happen if it were gone? Ask the questions. Let the objects answer. They will. And in that absurdity, a strange kind of clarity emerges. You stop walking through life numb. You start living with precision, with lightness, with presence. Even your routine becomes deeper. Your toothbrush tells you you're caring for a body that's fading. Do it well. Your bed says, "Rest here tonight, but know you will rise." Even your trash bin becomes a symbol, whispering, "What you throw away today, you once thought you needed." These aren't hallucinations. They're awakenings, reminders, anchors, and every time you hear them, you lose a little more attachment and gain a little more freedom. Marcus Aurelius practiced this because he had to. He had everything: power, wealth, servants, and he knew that having more made it harder to stay grounded. So he trained himself with absurd methods that cut deep, talking to robes, thanking plates, letting his crown remind him, "You are only a man." Because in a world that says, "You are what you own," this practice whispers, "You are what you can let go of." And that's where the magic is. That's where peace lives. When nothing defines you, everything becomes lighter, and you become untouchable. Not by isolation, but by presence. Not by having nothing, but by needing nothing. The more you let your objects speak, the more your mind quiets. Because every goodbye is softened by preparation, and every possession becomes a teacher. So tonight, as you lay down, look around your room. Let the things speak, not to control you, but to free you. That's the art. That's the lesson. And that's how you stay human in a world full of noise. Through the quiet voice of a chair that reminds you, it was never yours to begin with. So after hearing the voice of your chair and letting go of your grip on things, you're already starting to loosen something deeper, the illusion of control. But there's one attachment left that's harder to break than any other. One that lives in the background of every fear, every plan, every moment of resistance. Your attachment to life itself. And the Stoics didn't avoid it. They faced it, daily. They didn't just talk about death in passing. They practiced it, every morning. And no, not in a morbid way, not in fear, but as a kind of spiritual reset button. A way to clear out the emotional clutter that builds up when you live like you'll live forever. Because when you start your day by rehearsing your own death, you stop wasting time. You stop chasing meaning in all the wrong places. You stop pretending you're invincible. You see clearly, and clarity is freedom. Most people go through life avoiding the thought of death like it's contagious. They keep busy. They numb out. They distract themselves. Because if they stop, if they slow down, if they sit still for too long, the silence creeps in, and with it, the truth. You are temporary, and so is everything you love. But the Stoics didn't run from that truth. They used it. Marcus Aurelius wrote it down again and again in his journal. Seneca told his students to think about death, not once a year, not once a month, but every single day. Because there's something about looking at your own mortality that scrapes off the noise. It makes you honest. It makes you brave. And strangely, it makes you lighter. The practice begins like this. You wake up. Before reaching for your phone, before thinking about your schedule, you remind yourself, I could die today. Not in a dramatic way, not to scare yourself, but to come home to what's real. Then you go deeper. You don't just say it, you feel it. You walk through it. You mentally rehearse the end. What if this was your last sunrise? What if the person you love most wasn't here tomorrow? What would you do differently today if there was no next week? And again, this isn't meant to create anxiety. It's meant to cut through the lie that you have unlimited time. Because you don't. No one does. But that's not bad news. It's the best wake-up call you'll ever get. Because when you accept death, you stop dying a little every day trying to avoid it. You start living fully. You say what you mean. You let go of grudges. You take the walk. You call the friend. You do the thing you've been putting off. You start trading shallow pleasures for deep presence. You stop trying to impress people who wouldn't even attend your funeral, and you begin to direct your energy where it matters. The reason the Stoics practiced mental death in the morning is because it's the moment you have the most power. Before the distractions, before the pressures, before the identity kicks back in. You start clean, like wiping the whiteboard, like rebooting the software. You remove yesterday's baggage. You stop dragging the weight of your past into your present. And here's where it gets even more interesting. When you practice dying, you start noticing what really lives. The texture of your breath, the sound of someone's laugh, the way the light bends through your window, the taste of a simple meal, the ridiculous joy of being here. Still, this isn't philosophy for monks. This is survival for people drowning in stress. Because when you start your day with death, you don't overreact to little problems. You don't spin out when things don't go your way. You don't waste hours chasing validation or overthinking what someone said. You zoom out. You ask, will this matter when I'm gone? And if the answer is no, you let it go. That's the strength Stoicism builds, the kind that can face the worst and still be gentle. But this isn't just about emotional control, it's about alignment. Most people live like they'll start their real life someday, when things settle down, when the job gets easier, when they're more confident. But practicing your death every morning forces the question, if not now, when? And suddenly, your priorities rearrange themselves. The important rises to the top. The noise falls away. You spend less. You scroll less. You argue less. You hold on to things less tightly. And at the same time, you love more, deeper, faster, with no guarantee of later. And that's the beautiful twist. Thinking about death doesn't make life darker. It makes it brighter. It gives you permission to live fully now, not in theory, but in practice. You stop waiting. You stop preparing for some perfect future that may never come. And instead, you live like a person who knows that the only thing guaranteed is this moment. There's also a strange kind of healing in this practice. When you walk through your own death each morning, you become less afraid of endings. Relationships ending, jobs ending, seasons of life ending, old versions of you falling away. You begin to see that every ending is just a space for something new to grow. That life isn't about holding on, it's about flowing through. And the more you flow, the less you suffer. There's even a practical layer to this. Practicing your own death makes you more effective. You stop procrastinating. You speak with clarity. You move with purpose. Because you know your time is currency, and you don't waste it like it's unlimited. This also builds resilience. If you start each day by facing the ultimate fear, then what can the day throw at you that will truly shake you? You've already faced the end. Everything else is just detail. That kind of mindset changes your posture, your energy, your presence. People feel it. They notice the calm, the focus, the ease. Because while everyone else is lost in noise, you've touched silence. And it's not just about you. When you live like this, you become a gift to others. You show up fully. You love without delay. You hold space instead of judgment. You understand what matters and what doesn't. And in a world desperate for clarity, that makes you rare. That makes you powerful. So tomorrow morning, before the world floods in, stop, close your eyes, and walk yourself to the edge. Not in fear, but in awareness. Let go of your name, your to-do list, your identity, your plans, just for a few minutes. Let it all fall away, and then come back, slowly, gently, as if you were given life all over again. That's the ritual, that's the reset, that's the practice. And if you do it long enough, you won't just find peace, you'll find purpose. Not the kind you chase, but the kind you become. Because when you stop running from death, you start running toward meaning. And when you carry that into the world, people feel it. They listen. They trust you. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've already asked the hardest question and made peace with the truth. That you are temporary. And that's exactly what makes you so powerful. Once you've faced death before breakfast, the rest of the day should feel lighter. But life doesn't always follow the rules. The world still throws things at you. Rude people, bad news, unfair treatment, random chaos that punches you in the gut when you least expect it. And even if you've trained your mind to accept loss, even if you've let go of possessions, and even if you've rehearsed your last breath, there's one thing that still sneaks past all of that: your involuntary reactions. The flinch, the recoil, the disgust, the anger that flashes before logic catches up, the deep irritation that shows up without your permission. And that's where things get interesting, because the next level of Stoic training isn't just about big ideas, it's about the micro moments, the automatic responses that betray how untrained most of us still are. So how do you fix that? How do you become emotionally bulletproof, not just in theory, but in your body? You start by doing something completely ridiculous. You start by using a rotten fish. Yes, You read that right. The Stoics believed that emotions were like physical habits, reflexes that could be rewired through exposure and repetition. And nothing exposes your raw, unfiltered reactions faster than being face to face with something disgusting. Not because it's dangerous, but because your mind thinks it is. Smell something rancid and your body reacts instantly. Face someone yelling at you and your pulse races. Hear a sound that grates on your nerves and irritation rises before you can even stop it. These aren't just random annoyances, they're data. They show you exactly where your control ends. So the Stoic method was simple. Bring the trigger closer. Sit with it. Study it. Remove the drama. And the rotten fish was a metaphor for that process. It was about confronting what repels you and learning to remain still. Not because you've turned off your emotions, but because you've built tolerance. You've raised your threshold. In modern terms, you could call it disgust training, sensory reprogramming, mental exposure therapy. But at its core, it's Stoicism applied to the senses. You start small. You sit in discomfort without trying to escape it. Maybe it's physical, a smell, a taste, a scratchy fabric, a freezing shower. Maybe it's social, letting someone talk over you without interrupting, listening to someone insult you without taking the bait. Maybe it's mental, allowing an embarrassing memory to surface without pushing it down, observing a jealous thought without acting on it. Each one is a kind of rotten fish. Each one triggers something primal. And your job? Stay. Not out of masochism, not to punish yourself, but to teach your nervous system a new story. Because right now, it reacts like everything is a threat. An awkward silence feels like danger. Criticism feels like an attack. Embarrassment feels like death. But if you keep sitting with those moments, without resisting, something changes. Your mind stops treating discomfort like poison. It starts treating it like weather, something that comes and goes. Nothing personal, nothing permanent. And once that shift happens, you're free. You walk into situations that used to terrify you, and you're calm. You hear something offensive, and instead of exploding, you observe. You feel the pressure rise in your chest, and instead of panicking, you pause, because you've trained your response. This isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming responsive instead of reactive. When someone throws their emotional chaos at you, you don't absorb it. You witness it. You choose how to respond, if at all. And that choice, that gap between trigger and reaction, is where your power lives. The rotten fish isn't about suffering, it's about precision. Can you feel disgust without flinching? Can you hear insults without needing to prove yourself? Can you experience discomfort without needing to fix it immediately? That's strength, and it's not loud. It doesn't look impressive. No one claps when you don't snap back. No one sees you swallowing your pride in silence. But that's where the real work happens. The Stoics didn't want surface-level peace. They wanted mastery. And mastery requires you to meet your own limits, on purpose. So you train. You expose yourself to things that make you squirm. You hold the rotten fish in your hand, not because you like it, but because it reveals the cracks in your armor. And you patch them. Slowly, deliberately, you go back into situations that used to control you, not to win, but to stay calm, and eventually your tolerance expands. You become the kind of person who stays steady when others spiral, not because you're special, but because you've practiced not flinching. That kind of calm is rare, and people feel it. They notice when you don't take the bait. They sense your energy isn't reactive. They realize you're grounded. And that kind of presence changes rooms. It softens conflict. It stabilizes chaos. It brings clarity, because you're not adding more noise to the world. You're anchoring it. That's the result of training with your own rotten fish. You stop being shocked by difficulty. You stop being afraid of mess. You stop being ruled by your own automatic responses. You start choosing, and the choice becomes faster over time, until one day it's not even a choice. You just are. Steady, calm, unshakable. That's emotional bulletproofing. It doesn't mean you never feel anything. It means you're no longer ruled by what you feel. You respond, not because you're trying to control everything, but because you've made peace with not needing to. Even the word bulletproof is misleading. You're not hard, you're fluid, resilient, soft in the right places, firm where it matters. And that's why discomfort can't control you anymore. You've sat with the smell. You've faced the awkwardness. You've stood still in the storm and found that you were still there, unmoved. Not because nothing touched you, but because you didn't run. You stayed, you watched, you breathed. And in that stillness, you rewrote your story. You taught your nervous system that it's safe. And now, when life hits you with its loudest chaos, you smile. Because you've smelled worse. You've faced worse. You've trained for this. That's what a rotten fish gives you. Freedom through exposure. Peace through pressure. Calm through chaos. And from here on, you don't need the world to be comfortable. Because you are, right where you are. No matter what shows up. No matter what it smells like. Once you've trained yourself not to flinch, to face discomfort head-on and walk through disgust without blinking, you begin to develop a different kind of strength. But there's one more layer of armor the Stoics wore, a shield so unexpected most people miss it completely. Humor. Yes, humor. Not the kind that hides pain with sarcasm, not the nervous laughter that masks insecurity, not the social mask we put on when things get awkward. Stoic humor was sharper, stranger, more powerful. It wasn't about escaping the pain, it was about holding it in your hand and laughing at it. Not because it didn't matter, but because you'd taken away its power. Seneca, the Stoic playwright, advisor, and philosopher, understood this better than anyone. He lived in a world where emperors murdered on a whim, where exile and execution came without warning, where the people you trusted could be your downfall. And yet, he didn't just endure it. He laughed at it, not to deny the darkness, but to stare straight into it without flinching. He treated life's cruelty like a bad joke with perfect timing. Because once you see the absurdity in how fragile and chaotic existence is, you either cry or you laugh. And crying doesn't change the outcome. Seneca chose laughter not because life was funny, but because it was tragic, because it was unfair, because it didn't make sense, and because realizing you have no control over most of it can either crush you or set you free. He would write with biting wit about being exiled by an emperor, only to return more respected than ever, about losing wealth and gaining perspective, about how people wasted time obsessing over status, as if they could take their titles to the grave. His humor wasn't shallow, it was razor-sharp truth in disguise. The reason Stoic humor is so powerful is because it disrupts the cycle. When something bad happens, your instinct is to resist, to complain, to panic. But laughter breaks that pattern. It tells your brain, this isn't the end. It reframes the story. And when you can change the story, you change your experience of suffering. Seneca used humor as a philosophical tool, not to deflect, but to diffuse. He understood that the mind, under pressure, tends to exaggerate. It creates spirals. It builds monsters out of shadows. But laughter punctures the drama. It brings you back to earth. This isn't about pretending nothing is serious. It's about recognizing that even the serious can be seen from another angle. That life, in its harshest moments, is still full of irony. The rich fear losing what the poor never had. The powerful crumble under the pressure they created. The healthy obsess over their diets and still fall ill. The most prepared people die unexpectedly. You plan, you push, you perfect. And then life comes along and flips the script anyway. Seneca didn't run from that reality. He leaned into it. He looked at the universe, saw the mess, the unpredictability, the ridiculous twists, and instead of fighting it, he smirked. That smirk was freedom. It meant he wasn't owned by the chaos. Because here's the truth. Humor is the highest form of stoic detachment. It's saying, I see what you're doing, life, and I won't take the bait. It's refusing to give your suffering more power than it deserves, and that refusal is strength. Most people don't realize how tightly they grip seriousness. They think if they don't worry, they don't care. If they don't stress, they're being irresponsible. If they laugh, they're being insensitive. But the Stoics flipped that. They said, if you can't laugh at it, it still owns you. Seneca believed that humor wasn't just a luxury, it was a skill, one you could sharpen, one that required perspective, practice, and courage. Because it takes courage to laugh in the face of real pain, not the pain of inconvenience, but real loss, betrayal, failure. And that's exactly why it works. Because humor, when rooted in truth, is clarity. It's the sign that you're no longer trapped in the narrative. You've risen above it. You've zoomed out. You see the bigger picture, the irony, the contradiction. And instead of being bitter, you're entertained by it. This kind of humor is rare. It's not used to escape the moment. It's used to master it. You lose your job. Ah, the universe teaching me how to live on rice and character. You get ghosted after opening your heart. Fantastic. Rejection builds resilience and better taste. You fail publicly. Now I'm qualified to teach humility with a side of self-deprecating charm. This doesn't make you reckless. It makes you emotionally agile. You stop needing everything to go right to feel right. You stop waiting for the world to be fair before you feel peace. You take back your power by refusing to give your pain the last word. And Seneca knew how much power there was in the last word. He was a master of turning tragedy into theater, of making audiences laugh while quietly telling them the harshest truths about power, greed, love, and mortality. He saw that most people are so busy trying to be taken seriously, they lose their sense of humor entirely, and with it, they lose their flexibility, their ability to bend when life pushes instead of snapping in half. The Stoic laugh isn't cruel, it's compassionate. It sees the madness of life and chooses to play along without being consumed. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need to win every argument. It doesn't need to be right, because it already understands that most of what people take seriously is just noise. That's why Stoic humor isn't loud. It's not desperate. It's not used to seek approval. It's quiet, dry, understated. The kind of joke you almost miss, until it lands a second later and rewires how you see everything. And here's the genius. Once you learn to laugh at something, you rob it of its power. You neutralize it. Because laughter and fear can't occupy the same space. Seneca practiced this like it was medicine. When his wealth was stripped, he joked about finally being free of furniture. When he was sentenced to death, he greeted it with calm detachment and an almost theatrical grace, because the universe could take his body, but not his attitude. That's what Stoic humor gives you. attitude, not fake positivity, not toxic optimism, just the kind of grounded, irreverent presence that keeps your soul light even when the world is heavy. It's not about ignoring injustice, it's about surviving it. It's about looking it in the face and saying, I see you, but I'm not letting you ruin my spirit. Because the minute you can laugh, even quietly, even once, it means you're still free. And that freedom, that's the real victory. That's how you win even when life is losing its mind around you. So next time something absurd happens, something painful, unfair, completely senseless, pause. Take a breath and ask yourself, what would Seneca say? What would he write in his little notebook? Probably something simple, dry, brutal, hilarious. And in that moment, you'll feel it too, that flicker of calm in the chaos, that internal smile that says, I see what you're doing, life. Nice try. And then you carry on, lighter, sharper, unbothered, stoic, not just in silence, but in laughter. Once you've learned to laugh at the universe, to see its chaos, its cruelty, and still smirk with clarity, you gain access to a kind of inner strength that doesn't depend on outcomes. But clarity, while powerful, still needs testing. It still needs pressure. Without it, it fades. So the Stoics didn't stop with detachment or humor. They did something even stranger. They deliberately chose discomfort, not because they hated themselves, not to suffer for the sake of suffering, but because they understood something most people never do. Pleasure is seductive, and comfort, if not checked, will quietly take over your life. Seneca wrote about walking around in shabby clothes, eating cheap, bland food for days, sleeping on the floor, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Marcus Aurelius trained his mind to remain still in freezing conditions. Epictetus taught that freedom doesn't come from having more, it comes from needing less. The point wasn't to punish the body, it was to teach the soul that it didn't need to be coddled in order to remain calm. That's where the cold, wet sock comes in. Not literally, but symbolically. A small act of discomfort that breaks routine. Something that annoys you, distracts you, makes your body want to complain. And then you stay with it. You walk through the day like that. A little bit itchy, a little bit cold, slightly irritated, and completely free. Why? Because you're no longer controlled by your craving for comfort. And that's where true power begins. Most people spend their entire lives adjusting their environment to avoid discomfort. The perfect mattress, the perfect seat temperature, the exact coffee order. Everything has to be just right, or the day is ruined. But what if your state of mind didn't depend on your physical state at all? What if you could be uncomfortable and still focused, still kind, still sharp? That's what the Stoics trained for. That's why they practiced voluntary discomfort, because it exposed the places where their strength was still dependent on conditions. You wear a cold sock, not because you enjoy it, but because it reveals how quickly the mind complains. And the day everything fell apart was also the day everything began to shift. When you decide to mark that day, year after year, not with grief, but with reflection, you take back control of the narrative. You reclaim the date not as a wound, but as a landmark, a turning point, a beginning disguised as an ending. This isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about refusing to stay stuck inside the hurt. It's about turning the moment that felt like death into a ritual that gives you life. Most people avoid the anniversaries of pain. They dread them. They numb them. They try to erase them from memory. But you, if you're walking the Stoic path, do something different. You face the day. You light a candle, you pour a drink, you go for a walk in silence, or you throw a dinner with the people who've seen you rebuild. You celebrate not because the event was good, but because you are stronger now, wiser, softer in the right places, sharper in the others. You celebrate the moment your ego cracked, the moment your plans shattered, the moment you stopped pretending and started becoming, because what broke you also revealed you. This kind of annual ritual doesn't just offer meaning, it offers clarity. Every time the date comes around, you get to ask, who was I before this day? What changed in me because of it? And who have I become since? That's not self-pity, that's conscious integration. And that's the Stoic way. They believed everything has purpose if you're willing to give it one. Even tragedy, especially tragedy, because that's where character is formed, where illusions burn off, where truth shows up, raw, brutal, undeniable. And when you meet that truth without resistance, you step into a deeper version of yourself. So why not mark it? Why not name it? Why not turn the worst day into a strange kind of celebration? Not a celebration of the event, a celebration of what you've made from it. This gives you perspective on pain that still lingers. It creates distance, structure, a frame. And in that frame, the chaos softens. Because now, instead of carrying the day like a scar, you carry it like a torch. It becomes a reminder of your own resilience. This also teaches emotional flexibility. When life hits you with something new, some future disaster, betrayal, loss, you'll know exactly what to do with it. You'll say, this will become part of the calendar. This will be marked. This will be something I'll return to, not with dread, but with reverence, because pain is part of the rhythm of being alive, and honoring it doesn't make you weaker, it makes you whole. Some years you'll reflect quietly, some years you'll laugh, some years you'll cry again, and that's okay. The festival changes shape, just like you do, but it's always there, a constant in the chaos, a yearly reminder that growth isn't found in comfort, it's found in the fire. And if you let it, the worst day of your life becomes your greatest teacher, maybe even your favorite one, because it didn't ruin you. It revealed what you're really made of. You can turn this into a real practice. Pick the day, set time aside, give it a name. Maybe it's the day I let go. Maybe it's the day I found my spine. Maybe it's the end that freed me. Mark it in your calendar like a birthday, a rebirth day. Each year, return to it, not to relive it, to witness how far you've come. This ritual does something else too. It trains you to see all future pain as material. Nothing is wasted. No setback is random. No loss is meaningless. You begin to think like a philosopher, even in grief. You ask better questions. You stay more curious. You refuse to be destroyed by what hurt you. Instead, you transform it. You take the rubble and build something new. And each year, when that day arrives, you light a candle again, not because you're mourning, but because you're awake. Because you remember what it cost you to become who you are. Because you respect the version of yourself that survived. This is Stoic art, Stoic ritual, Stoic reclamation. You don't just bounce back from the worst thing. You give it meaning. You fold it into your life story as a sacred chapter, one that hurt like hell, but gave you something no good day ever could. It gave you you, stripped down, wide-eyed, honest, capable of loving better, living better, being more fully in the world, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. So, celebrate, however feels right. Write a letter, take a solo hike, cook a meal that reminds you of who you were, or throw a party for the version of yourself that never gave up. Make the day sacred, because it is. It was the day life stopped going to plan and started becoming real. That's worth honoring. That's worth remembering. And in the remembering, you don't just heal. You build something stronger than happiness. You build meaning. And meaning lasts longer than anything pain can take. After learning to honor your lowest point like a sacred day, after reclaiming pain and turning it into something meaningful, something personal, something strangely beautiful, you realize how often your suffering wasn't about the event itself, but about the story you told. The story that said, "This should not have happened." The voice that insisted, "I know how things were supposed to go." That voice wasn't just wounded, it was sure, it was convinced. It left no room for possibility. And that's the problem. Not pain, but certainty. Certainty doesn't just blind you to growth. It builds walls around your mind. It turns opinions into prisons. It replaces presence with assumptions. It shuts the door on curiosity, which means it shuts the door on learning. So the Stoics, obsessed with self-awareness and mental clarity, would have loved this next discipline. It's not something you hear often in their texts, but it's buried in the heart of everything they taught. A strange, simple, difficult practice, one that reveals just how often we speak from ego instead of truth. Speak only in questions for an entire day. No statements, no declarations, no summaries of what you think you know. Just questions, one after another, with every person you talk to. Why? Because nothing exposes the mind's bias faster than removing its favorite tool, the illusion of being right. When you spend an entire day in questions, you become hyper-aware of how much of your communication is just subtle control, a way of steering conversations, a method of reinforcing your perspective, a form of quietly demanding agreement. But when you strip that away, you're left with something more honest: inquiry, openness, humility. It feels awkward at first. The ego doesn't like it. It wants to add value, to give advice, to finish sentences. But the moment you start shaping your speech into questions, something shifts. You stop trying to win conversations. You start entering them. You ask, what are they really saying? What am I trying to prove? What if I'm wrong about this? What else could this mean? And those questions start shaping your thoughts, not just your words. You become a better listener, not because you're suddenly more patient, but because you're no longer planning your next brilliant point. You're curious. You want to hear, not to respond, but to understand. This kind of mental discipline does something strange. It lowers the emotional temperature of every interaction, because questions are soft. They don't threaten. They don't demand. They invite. Even when you disagree, phrasing your doubt as a question disarms conflict. Do you think there's another way to look at this? Is much more powerful than "you're wrong." It leaves space. And in that space, growth happens. You also notice something else: how addicted people are to being right, how quickly conversations become contests, how rare it is to hear someone say, "I don't know." But if you live in questions for a day, you start to feel free. You don't need to fix anyone. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to impress. You're just exploring, feeling your way forward. This isn't passive, it's sharp. Because asking good questions is harder than giving quick answers. It requires thinking, slowing down, letting go of the spotlight. It requires dropping the performance and showing up with real presence. The Stoics believed in examining everything, including themselves. They questioned their motives, their beliefs, their roles, their responses. Socrates, who shaped early Stoic thought, was famous for one thing: relentless questions. He tore apart false confidence not with anger, but with inquiry. He didn't shout people into submission. He asked them to look again. This practice brings you into that same energy. It turns every conversation into a mirror, every statement into a possibility, every belief into a hypothesis. And that's important, because most of what we think we know is based on habits, fears, and second-hand ideas. When you question instead of declare, you slow the automatic response. You give your brain time to adjust. You hear yourself more clearly. And if your thoughts are flawed, which they often are, you catch it before it turns into action. This isn't just a communication tool. It's a purification ritual for your speech. Because if your words come from a place of curiosity, they carry less weight and more influence. People lean in. They trust your presence more, not because you're dominant, but because you're real. And in a world addicted to certainty, that's rare. This practice also exposes how much your identity is tied to your opinions. Can you go a whole day without making definitive statements about yourself, without explaining, defending, or announcing? Can you live in a state of open discovery? Can you let yourself be seen without armor? When you do, you feel different. You think differently. You notice more. You rush less. You stop needing to win. And that's where wisdom begins. Not with knowing, with wondering, not with answers, with silence. Because the most powerful people aren't the loudest. They're the ones asking the questions no one else thought to ask. This discipline is more than a game. It's a path. It reveals how often your need to speak comes from insecurity, how often your tone comes from tension, how often your knowledge is actually just conditioning. When you step into a full day of inquiry, you don't just change how you speak, you change how you see. You stop seeing people as opponents. You stop treating opinions like threats. You meet the moment with curiosity, and that transforms it. You stop assuming you're right. You stop needing to be. You start being present, fully, openly, calmly, because real confidence doesn't shout. It asks, and then it listens. The longer you stay in this practice, the more it reveals. You see how little you actually need to say. You feel how much energy goes into defending what you're not even sure you believe. You watch as people respond to your openness with softness of their own. Because questions melt resistance. They lower shields. They show trust. They create space. So try it. Just for one day. Speak only in questions. Let your ego squirm. Let your identity feel less defined. Let your mind stretch. You'll be uncomfortable. That's the point. But by the end of the day, you'll feel something new, not more certain, more free. Once you've spent a day speaking only in questions, once you've tasted the strange calm that comes from setting down the need to prove, to instruct, to sound certain, you begin to notice just how deep that need for certainty runs. It's not just in conversations, it's in the way you carry yourself. It's in the pressure to have a plan, the fear of being lost, the ache to feel seen. That ache isn't shallow. It lives in the bones of identity. The unspoken belief that you need to be someone, that you need to become something, that there's a cosmic interview happening somewhere, an invisible panel watching your life unfold, and if you just do everything right, you'll finally be approved. You'll finally matter. But what if you've been applying for a job that doesn't exist? What if there is no final validation coming? No universal applause? No higher role waiting to be unlocked once you finally get your act together? This is where Stoicism steps in with a kind of quiet, rebellious wisdom. It doesn't scream for you to change your life. It invites you to fire yourself from the entire mental job interview you've been performing in. Because the pursuit of meaning, when driven by fear, becomes a trap, a lifelong audition. You wake up every day trying to be worthy. You build an identity around being valuable. You collect evidence that you matter, hoping someone or something will stamp your file and say, "Yes, you passed." But what if you stopped? Not out of despair, out of clarity. What if you stepped out of the race for cosmic approval, not because you failed, but because you finally saw through it? Firing yourself doesn't mean giving up. It means releasing the role you were never hired for, the one that says your value must be proven, that your life must have some impressive arc, that everything you do must lead to something greater. The Stoics didn't believe you had to earn existence. They believed you had to live it. That difference changes everything. It allows you to let go of the pressure to be extraordinary, to stop measuring your life by impact, influence, or legacy. Instead, you begin measuring it by presence, by clarity, by whether your actions align with your nature, not with someone else's scoreboard. You stop asking, "Am I doing enough?" and start asking, "Is this aligned with my character?" You stop chasing identity like a costume and start letting your choices speak for themselves. The truth is, most people live like they're in an interview that never ends. Every choice is filtered through how it might look. Every conversation is half performance. Every quiet moment is filled with the noise of trying to become someone important. But what if you let go of being important? What if you stopped auditioning? You start to feel something strange. A space opens up. A breath you didn't know you were holding begins to release. You realize that much of your suffering came not from what was happening, but from what you were trying to prove through it. That's the real weight. Trying to prove you're resilient, that you're special, that you're good, that you're valuable. Trying to prove you have a purpose, that you're not wasting time, that you're going somewhere meaningful. Firing yourself means accepting that life doesn't owe you a clear job description. You're not here to perform for the universe. You're here to live in it, fully, honestly, without a script. And that might sound terrifying, but underneath the fear is something else: relief. Because once you stop performing, you can finally feel. You can finally show up as yourself, not as a concept, but as a presence. You can let go of the idea that there's some better version of you that needs to emerge before you're allowed to rest. You don't need to be the best, or the wisest, or the most self-actualized. You just need to be aware, awake, grounded in your own life. This doesn't mean apathy. It means alignment. You can still create, still love, still challenge yourself, but not because you're trying to earn worth, because you enjoy the process, because it reflects your nature. That's what the Stoics meant by living in agreement with nature, not following rules, but following your internal compass. And that compass becomes clearer when you're no longer trying to make it point north for someone else. You stop shaping your path to fit expectations, external or internal. You stop obsessing over whether your choices mean something. You start choosing for the sake of the action itself. This creates a radical kind of freedom. You're not lazy, you're liberated. You don't fear being misunderstood because there's nothing left to defend. You stop trying to impress life. You begin to participate in it. You live without the invisible job title, without the need for results to justify your efforts. And the irony is, once you stop chasing purpose like a destination, you begin to live with more purpose than ever. Because your energy isn't scattered trying to build an identity, it's focused on embodying one. You move with less tension, less resistance, less comparison. You no longer ask, "What should I be doing?" You ask, "What's the right thing to do right now?" And in that question, you stop needing a cosmic resume. you start cultivating character. That's what the Stoics cared about. Not recognition, not achievement, not legacy. Character. And character doesn't need an audience. It's built quietly, lived privately, reflected through small, consistent choices. Once you see this, the pressure begins to lift. You realize there's no final test, no committee watching, no secret score. There's just this moment, this breath, this chance to respond with clarity. You don't need to be profound. You don't need to be remembered. You just need to be real. And realness doesn't perform. It participates. That's what firing yourself gives you. It gives you back your own attention. It returns your energy from the fantasy of significance to the simplicity of presence. You stop trying to be someone. You start being something. Rooted, alive, whole. Not because you've earned it, but because you've stopped trying to. That's the deepest Stoic freedom. You belong, not because you've passed some universal test, but because you were never being tested in the first place. You're not waiting to be hired by life. You're already on the inside. Once you've fired yourself from the invisible job of proving your worth, once you've walked away from the role you never applied for and stopped trying to meet some imagined cosmic standard, you find yourself face to face with something even more real. Without the pressure to perform, without the endless push to become someone meaningful, you're left with the raw truth of what you actually are. And beneath all the stories, all the striving, all the structure, there's one fact no one escapes. You're going to die. This isn't a threat. It's a reminder. One the Stoics return to constantly, not to scare themselves, but to stay awake. Not to feel dread, but to find clarity. They didn't just meditate on death. They personalized it. They looked at their future corpses not with disgust, but with curiosity. And more than that, they made peace with them. Because if you can befriend your own future body, the one that's no longer breathing, no longer speaking, no longer thinking, then your choices today begin to shift. You stop chasing what won't matter. You stop running from what already is. You begin to live with the kind of urgency that's not frantic, but focused. The practice is simple, though uncomfortable. You picture your body after death, not as an abstract idea, but as something real. What it will look like, where it might be, how it will be found, what remains, what fades, what breaks down. And then you ask it questions. You ask your future corpse what it thinks of your current problems. You ask it whether the argument you had today still matters. You ask it how it feels about the way you spent your last few months. You let it answer. This sounds absurd, morbid, maybe even dark, but it's one of the clearest ways to reset your inner compass. Because the moment you confront the fact that your body will one day be cold, still, and silent, you stop wasting time. You stop putting energy into things that won't carry forward. You stop investing in identities that won't outlast your breath. You start asking, what will this mean to me when I'm no longer here to hold it? Your corpse doesn't care about your follower count. Your corpse doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't remember how liked you were or how polished you looked. It can't hold trophies. It doesn't need praise. It just exists as a leftover version of you. A version that shows exactly how temporary all of this is. And strangely, when you become friends with that version of yourself, not in theory, but through real mental dialogue, you become more alive. Because now you know what's not coming with you, and that frees you to let it go. You stop hoarding. You stop defending. You stop needing to hold the center of every story. You become lighter. The Stoics didn't avoid death in their thoughts. They welcomed it. They spoke to it. They gave it a seat at the table, not because they wanted to die, but because they didn't want to forget they would. and they used that awareness to sharpen their actions. When you think about your corpse, you start to make different decisions. You begin to prioritize what actually matters, not in a theoretical way, in a practical one. You realize how much time you've spent trying to be seen when your corpse won't see anything. How many days you've used up performing for people who won't even remember your name. You begin to ask yourself more honest questions. If this is one of the last 20 meals I ever eat, how do I want to show up for it? If this is one of the final conversations I ever have with this person, do I want it to be distant or present? If this is my final week of full health, what kind of energy do I want to give? You become aware of time in a deeper way, not as something to manage, but as something sacred. You stop saying yes to every request because your future corpse reminds you that your hours are not infinite. You stop delaying your rest because your future corpse already has an eternity of stillness ahead of it. You stop postponing your presence because that's the only thing you get to fully control. This mindset doesn't make you grim, it makes you focused. It helps you cut through the noise, the drama, the distractions. It teaches you to stop living like you'll live forever, because you won't. But here's the strange part. Befriending your future corpse doesn't lead to despair. It leads to relief. You no longer have to carry the impossible weight of living perfectly. You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to become the greatest version of yourself. You just have to be here, real, attentive, willing to let go of what doesn't serve your short time. This also builds emotional clarity. You stop pretending you'll deal with your pain later. You stop burying your feelings under productivity. You look at what's unresolved and ask, would I want to carry this to the grave? And if the answer is no, you begin to move. You speak up, you forgive, you let go, you show love more freely, you tell the truth, because your future corpse has no use for pride, no need for image. It cares only for what was felt deeply, spoken honestly, and lived fully. You start to live your life in a way your dead self would respect, not in grandeur, in groundedness. This also impacts how you relate to others. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop holding grudges like prizes. You start seeing other people as future corpses too, not in judgment, but in compassion. That annoying neighbor, future corpse. The person who betrayed you, future corpse. The stranger who didn't notice you today, same. And once you see everyone through that lens, you stop expecting perfection. You stop demanding attention. You let more go. You also stop fearing rejection, because your corpse will carry no shame. It won't remember the awkward moment. It won't be replaying the scene. It'll just rest. That means you can live more boldly now. You can try things. You can speak up. You can take risks that matter, not because you're guaranteed success, but because you're guaranteed an ending. And that makes every moment feel more valuable. You also gain freedom from unnecessary fear. Fear of failure. Your corpse will not carry embarrassment. Fear of embarrassment. It fades faster than breath. Fear of missing out. Your future corpse misses everything eventually. So you stop trying to be everywhere. You stop scattering your energy. You stop building a life that looks good from the outside and start crafting one that feels good on the inside. Because when you lie down in your final bed, none of the noise will come with you, only the integrity of how you moved, how you chose, how you showed up. This is what makes the Stoic practice of death meditation so powerful. It's not about dying, it's about finally learning how to live. It removes the performance. It breaks the trance. It brings your attention to the center. And once you've made peace with your ending, you begin to see your days not as burdens, but as chances, not as checklists, but as conversations with life itself. Your corpse is already waiting for you, and it's not angry, it's not judging, it's not rushing you. It's just there, silent, honest, a mirror you can't ignore. So talk to it. Ask it what matters. Let it strip away the lies. Let it remind you how little time you have to waste. Let it guide your decisions toward what's real. And when it's your time to join it, you won't panic. You won't beg for more. You'll look back and know you didn't sleepwalk through this gift. You'll know you befriended the ending and lived with your eyes open from the start. Once you've sat with the truth of your own death, once you've looked ahead to the body that will one day no longer carry your thoughts, your fears, your habits, something strange starts to happen. The walls you built around your identity begin to crack. The roles you've played for so long start to loosen their grip. But even when you've made peace with death, there's one more place where attachment hides. One last mirror that holds on to who you think you are. It lives in your reflection. The image you carry of yourself, your face, your name, your story. This is the most subtle form of ego. Not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet one that lives in your bathroom mirror. The one that looks back at you every morning and says, "This is you." But what if it's not? What if the face in the mirror is just a placeholder, a convenient container? What happens when you stare long enough that even that starts to dissolve? There's a practice for this, a strange, silent one, not ancient, but deeply stoic in its essence. You stand before a mirror and hold eye contact with your reflection for minutes, maybe longer. You don't look away. You don't adjust. You just stay, still, unblinking. And eventually, something happens. At first, it's uncomfortable. Your face looks familiar, but distant. Your features start to blur. Your identity starts to shift. The labels you've worn for years, your job, your personality, your strengths and flaws, begin to lose their shape. Then comes the disorientation, the sense that you're looking at a stranger, that the person staring back isn't you. Or maybe it is, but in a way you've never understood. That's when the calm arrives, because when you forget who you are, even for a moment, you forget the pressure to be that person. You forget the weight of the image. This practice is called sensory dissociation. It's not spiritual, it's neurological. You override the mental shortcuts your brain uses to keep your self-image intact. And when those shortcuts stop working, a deeper version of you emerges. One that's not attached to the shape of your face or the stories behind your eyes. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about seeing what's behind the performance, because most people live in a trance, a constant mental loop that says, "I am this type of person. I look like this. I speak like this. I am liked in this way. I am safe when I present myself correctly." But when you strip away the familiar visual, when you let it dissolve through prolonged observation, you start to detach from the performance.
And the self that's left behind?
That's the one the Stoics were interested in. The self beneath the mask, the presence beneath the face, the awareness behind the opinions. This kind of dissociation isn't escape, it's clarity. It shows you that much of your identity is visual habit, a repetition of image and name and narrative, and that repetition creates expectation. It keeps you reacting the same way, thinking the same thoughts, holding the same posture, even when it doesn't serve you anymore. But when the reflection loses power, you stop living by its demands. You stop trying to look a certain way to feel okay. You stop needing to be recognizable to be real. You allow yourself to be shapeless, wordless, unidentifiable. and that becomes freedom. Because most suffering doesn't come from events. It comes from what the self believes it must protect. And when that self-image begins to dissolve, so does the fear. You stop needing to fix how others see you. You stop adjusting your tone to fit the version of you they expect. You stop living through a filter. You just show up, unbranded, unlabeled, fully present. This is the core of Stoic calm, not apathy, presence, not detachment from life, but detachment from the identity that distorts life. When you stop reinforcing the face in the mirror as you become more fluid in your responses. You listen more, you argue less, you laugh more easily. You stop holding so tightly to being understood, because there's nothing left to defend. That's the irony. The more you try to be someone, the more tension you carry. But when you let the someone dissolve, even briefly, you move through the world like water. You adapt, you observe, you speak with clarity, not for validation, but for alignment.
This practice also shows you how little you need to feel real.
You don't need recognition. You don't need admiration. You don't need perfect words or perfect posture. You just need breath and presence and the courage to not hold on to your reflection like it's all you are. That's why this practice works. Because when the familiar image fades, you get to choose again. You get to re-enter your life without the weight of performance. You get to be fully human, flawed, shifting, open. You start noticing what's always been underneath, the part of you that watches everything and holds nothing. That part doesn't panic. It doesn't posture. It doesn't grasp. It just sees. And in seeing clearly, it allows you to return to the world with softness, with steadiness. You become more honest, not because you're trying to be, but because there's no mask left to manage. You don't hide behind your reflection anymore. You don't confuse your face for your truth. You begin to live from behind your eyes, not from what others see. That shift changes how you handle stress. You no longer respond to threats to your image like they're threats to your life. You stop needing to correct everyone's misunderstanding. You stop spinning your energy trying to repair someone else's version of you. You just live, clearly, calmly, with your focus on what's real. And what's real is always deeper than the face, always more honest than the name, always more peaceful than the story. So you keep practicing. You stand in front of the mirror, not as a ritual of vanity, but as a ritual of surrender. You watch the reflection blur. You feel the identity loosen. And in that blur, you find space to breathe, to let go, to start again. And when you walk away, something stays with you. The quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to be seen a certain way, because they've already seen what's behind the image. And it was enough. Once you've stared at your own reflection long enough to feel your identity slip through your fingers, once you've watched the image of who you thought you were begin to dissolve into something quieter, deeper, and more fluid, you start to notice just how much of your energy still hinges on how others see you. Not just your flaws, but your praise, the compliments, the admiration, the applause. It all feels good, sometimes too good. And that's the trap. Because just as insults can wound your ego, compliments can inflate it. Not obviously, not all at once, but subtly over time. They shape how you see yourself. They become a new kind of mirror. A mirror you don't control, and if you're not careful, you'll start needing it. Needing to be seen a certain way, needing to maintain the impression others have of you. But Stoicism teaches something radical. It doesn't just ask you to stay calm in hardship, it asks you to stay calm in praise. It's easy to spot your pain, harder to spot your pride, which is why this next practice is necessary. Strange, but necessary. You become immune to compliments by visualizing something absurd, a talking onion. The idea is simple. When someone praises you, when they speak highly of your work, your character, your talent, your beauty, you don't fight the words. You don't dismiss them. You don't argue. You accept the compliment. But in your mind, you hear it spoken in the voice of a talking onion. Not a wise sage, not a divine messenger. An onion, slightly squeaky, kind of confused, but deeply enthusiastic. "Wow, you're so smart," says the onion. "Your brain must be massive, absolutely juicy." It's ridiculous. And that's the point. Because when you picture praise coming from a talking onion, it breaks the trance of needing to believe it, the trance of attaching your worth to it, the trance of using someone else's words to reinforce your own image. You laugh, and the ego loses its grip. This isn't about mocking people who compliment you. It's about breaking your addiction to being praised. Because praise, like criticism, is just opinion, often fleeting, often shallow, often more about the person giving it than the one receiving it. But the ego doesn't care. The ego grabs anything it can to feel real. So when you hear, "You're amazing," your mind starts building on top of it. It starts thinking, "I have to keep being amazing. I need them to keep seeing me this way. This is who I am now." And that's when you stop being free. Because now you're managing perception. Now you're protecting an image. Now you're adjusting your behavior not based on truth, but based on what will keep the praise coming. The talking onion doesn't take that praise away. It simply detaches it from your identity. You hear the compliment, you thank the person, you appreciate the connection, but you don't absorb it like oxygen. You let it float. You smile at the onion. You move on. This might sound small, but it changes everything. Because once you stop needing to be praised, you stop performing. You stop polishing your words to be impressive. You stop volunteering your accomplishments in subtle ways. You stop chasing the glow of approval that never lasts. You begin to speak honestly, not for validation, but for clarity. You begin to create, not for applause, but for alignment. You begin to serve, not to be admired, but because it feels right. And that's the foundation of inner peace, not being unaffected by insult, but being undisturbed by praise. When you reach that level, you start moving differently. You listen more, talk less. You don't need to be the most interesting person in the room. You don't need to be seen. You just need to be present. The onion teaches you that praise is temporary, that it's often exaggerated, that it changes based on mood, culture, timing, and expectations. What people love you for today, they might criticize you for tomorrow. So you let their opinions pass through you, like wind, like weather. You don't argue with praise. You don't cling to it. You let it bounce off your surface like rain off stone. This gives you a new kind of freedom. You're no longer addicted to feedback. You're no longer chasing emotional highs. You're no longer building your life around staying impressive. Instead, you do what's needed. You do what aligns. And if no one notices, you're fine. Because the onion didn't show up today. Or maybe it did, but whispered, "Solid effort, my crunchy friend." And that was enough. This practice also helps you handle success more clearly. When something goes well, when you're recognized, praised, lifted up, you don't let it expand your ego. You let it pass. You acknowledge the moment. You stay grounded. Because you know success is just a moment, not a measure of who you are. This mindset keeps your energy focused. You're not distracted by the spotlight. You're not inflating under attention. You stay in your lane. You keep your peace. The Stoics warned constantly about flattery, about how dangerous it is to be surrounded by people who only reflect your greatness, because soon you start believing the illusion. And when that illusion breaks, when someone criticizes you, ignores you, forgets you, you crash. Unless you've trained, unless you've practiced staying neutral in the face of both praise and blame, unless you've spent time listening to onions, then you smile, you nod, you say, "Thank you," without needing to hold on to it. And then you return to your work, your path, your center. That's the power of this absurd exercise. It creates just enough distance between you and your ego to breathe again. It reminds you that self-worth doesn't rise and fall with compliments. It lives beneath all that. Quiet, calm, steady. Not because it's reinforced from the outside, but because it's chosen from within. And when you've trained your mind to stay balanced regardless of what the world says, when you no longer rise too high or fall too low, you gain something most never find. True stability, not emotional flatness, emotional sovereignty. So let the onion speak. Let it cheer you on. Let it remind you that all praise is just wind. Pleasant, temporary, unnecessary. You are still here, still centered, still whole. Once you've trained your mind to stay still in the face of praise, once you've laughed with the talking onion and let your ego stop chasing approval, you start to see how much of your life is built on preference. You prefer to be seen a certain way. You prefer things to go smoothly. You prefer comfort, convenience, certainty. And when those preferences aren't met, your peace disappears. You get irritated, disappointed, unsettled. But here's the truth. The Stoics knew all too well. If your peace depends on things going your way, then you aren't free. Freedom isn't found in controlling the world. It's found in releasing your need for the world to match your preferences. And that's why Epictetus would eat burnt toast for 30 days without complaining, not as punishment, as practice. Because what you train yourself to endure without resistance, you stop being controlled by. Burnt toast is a metaphor, a stand-in for all the little things in life that don't go the way you hoped. The food that's too cold, the line that's too long, the response that doesn't come, the plan that gets delayed. They're small things, but they reveal a large truth, how much power you've given to comfort. The moment something unpleasant happens, your mind protests. This isn't how it should be. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't fair. But Stoicism says, stop asking the world to obey your preferences. Start asking yourself to loosen your grip on them. When Epictetus taught his students, he wasn't interested in their success. He was interested in their self-mastery, and that meant being indifferent to discomfort, not out of denial, but out of design. He believed the key to freedom wasn't adding more pleasure. It was removing unnecessary desire. So when you eat burnt toast for 30 days, or drink lukewarm water, or wear the same outfit, or sleep on the floor, you're not suffering. You're simplifying. You're practicing detachment from the invisible chains that tie your happiness to conditions. It doesn't matter if you can afford better. It doesn't matter if you know how to get what you want. The point is to build strength not through getting, but through needing less. Because needing less makes you immune to manipulation. If your peace depends on coffee being made a certain way, someone can take your calm by ruining your drink. If your happiness depends on traffic being light, or your partner saying the right thing, or your phone loading fast, then you're handing out power to anything that can interrupt your expectations. Burnt toast is the invitation to take that power back. When you eat it without flinching, without complaint, without needing it to be different, you're training your nervous system to stay calm in the face of inconvenience. And that calm is priceless, because now you're no longer a puppet pulled by circumstance. You're rooted. You're whole before the toast even hits the plate. This training also reveals how many of your preferences are actually illusions. Most of the time, you don't want things to go a certain way because you truly care. You want them to go that way because you're afraid of how you'll feel if they don't. You don't mind burnt toast. You mind feeling like you have less control. You don't hate discomfort. You hate feeling like your comfort is being threatened. But when you intentionally choose discomfort, you flip the script. You become the one in control. You decide to let go. And what was once a source of irritation becomes a source of freedom. This practice isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming flexible. When you stop needing everything to be perfect, you move through life with less friction. You smile when plans change. You breathe when things go wrong. You show up with the same energy, no matter what's on your plate. And over time, your mind starts to relax, because it knows you're no longer hostage to your preferences. You still enjoy comfort, but you don't depend on it. You can still appreciate pleasure, but you don't require it to feel okay. This allows you to operate in any environment, with any people, in any situation, because you're not there to get something. You're there to be someone steady, someone whole. The Stoics believed that preference was the root of suffering, not because it's wrong to want something, but because it's dangerous to need it too much. Every preference you hold too tightly becomes a weakness, a vulnerability, and the only way to find out which ones are controlling you is to remove them, on purpose. You don't wait for life to burn your toast, you do it yourself. And when you eat it without resistance, you send a signal to your own mind. I don't need this to be better. I'm fine as I am. That signal builds confidence, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that comes from knowing you won't fall apart when things go sideways. You become dependable, not just to others, to yourself, because you've trained to be undisturbed. That's why this practice is powerful, not because it's extreme, but because it's repeatable. You don't need a dramatic moment to build resilience. You just need breakfast. You need a choice. You need a moment of discomfort you don't run from. It could be cold water in the shower, silence during a pause, delayed gratification in conversation, fewer options when you're shopping. Every time you choose the simpler, rougher path, your tolerance expands. And when your tolerance expands, so does your freedom. Because the less you need, the more present you become. You're no longer reacting to disappointment. You're observing it, letting it pass. You're no longer chasing comfort. You're grounded in clarity. And clarity is worth more than convenience. Because clarity keeps you from making decisions based on fear or craving. Clarity keeps your mood from rising and falling with what the world gives you. Clarity teaches you that suffering begins the moment you say, "This should be different." But preference removal says, "Let it be what it is." And from that space, you move forward, not with resistance, but with power. Because now, whether it's burnt toast or missed calls or long waits or unmet plans, you stay the same. Calm, clear, complete. And that's a version of strength most people will never understand, because they're too busy reaching for the next fix. But you, if you've trained, are already there. Not because you got what you wanted, but because you no longer need it to feel free. After learning to let go of your preferences, after burning the toast and eating it anyway, something deeper starts to shift. You stop being surprised when life doesn't go your way. You stop reacting with shock when comfort disappears. But there's one final layer to peel back, because even after you've mastered discomfort in the small things, there's still one fear that quietly haunts the edges of your mind. One scenario that feels too big, too overwhelming, too impossible to train for. The end of everything. Not just your own life, the collapse of all of it. Civilization, systems, stability, people you love, the entire structure of the world as you know it, gone. And deep down, your nervous system assumes it would break you, that if it all fell apart, you'd fall apart with it. But what if it wouldn't? What if you could train for that too? The Stoics believed that peace wasn't real until it had been tested, and what better test than the ultimate one, mentally rehearsing the end of the world, before breakfast, every day. Not as a fear-based panic, but as a thought experiment, a reset button, a chance to meet the worst and remain steady. The practice is simple but powerful. In the quiet moments of morning, before food, before noise, you run the scenario. You close your eyes and ask, what if everything collapsed today? Not in abstraction, in detail. What if the power grid failed? What if the markets crashed? What if the cities burned? What if communication stopped? What if help never came? What would I do? What would I protect? Who would I become? And more importantly, would I still be myself? This isn't an exercise in paranoia. It's the sharpening of composure. Because the point isn't to predict the future. The point is to see how much of your calm is dependent on stability. The moment you realize that your daily peace hinges on civilization functioning correctly, you see how fragile it really is. But when you mentally walk through collapse, and don't collapse with it, you build something stronger than reassurance. You build readiness, because you've already seen it, already felt it, already prepared your mind to keep breathing, keep moving, keep serving, even when the world doesn't offer comfort or order or praise. This practice puts your modern worries in perspective. That awkward conversation, small. That late payment, small. That delayed plan, insignificant. When you've rehearsed apocalypse, the everyday mess stops overwhelming you. You no longer make emergencies out of inconvenience. You no longer confuse discomfort with danger. You no longer panic when life changes course, because you've already imagined the ultimate course correction. And when you've made peace with total collapse, you're free to live fully, even in a broken world. The Stoics weren't doomsayers. They were realists. They believed that anything that can happen might happen, and the wise person doesn't flinch when it does, because they've seen it in their mind first. Marcus Aurelius asked himself daily to think of life's worst outcomes, not to feel miserable, but to stop being surprised. Surprise is the enemy of peace. It knocks the breath out of you. It turns discomfort into panic. But the trained mind doesn't get surprised. It gets prepared. So when you simulate the end of the world, you take your most irrational fear and drag it into the light. You give it shape. You watch it unfold, and you stand in the middle of it, not as a victim, but as a calm participant. That changes you. You realize you can handle more than you thought. You stop needing everything to be okay in order to be okay. And that's where resilience begins. This daily practice also shifts how you define success. Because when you've mentally stood in the ruins of society, success stops looking like status or wealth or praise. It starts looking like stability of mind, clarity in chaos, integrity when no one's watching. You begin to value different things: inner strength, presence, resourcefulness, the ability to adapt, to listen, to lead, not with power, but with stillness. And when you walk back into your normal life after this mental exercise, your eyes are clearer, your breath is deeper, your reactions are slower, because you're no longer waiting for things to go right in order to feel calm. You've felt what it would be like if nothing ever did again, and you're still standing. That perspective becomes a superpower. It makes you a better leader, a better partner, a better thinker. Because now, when others spiral in crisis, you don't get pulled in. You don't add fuel, you hold space, you stay grounded. And that grounding spreads. This practice also teaches radical gratitude, not the forced kind, the real kind. Because once you've mentally lost everything, having anything feels like a miracle. A warm room, a full fridge, a working phone, the quiet hum of civilization doing its job. You stop taking it for granted, and yet you stop needing it to feel whole. That balance is rare. Most people are either asleep to their privilege or paralyzed by fear of losing it. But you, if you've trained, can live awake to both. Grateful for what's working, ready for what might fail. This gives you emotional flexibility. You stop clinging to comfort as your foundation. You build your foundation within. So even when the world shakes, you remain still. Even when things fall apart, you don't. You carry your calm with you, not as denial, but as preparation. And every time you rehearse collapse, you build more trust in your ability to stay human inside it. This also softens your ego, because when you simulate the end, you realize how small you are in the grand scheme. You stop acting like the world revolves around your stress, your plans, your routines. You see yourself as part of something bigger, a system, a moment, a flicker. That perspective humbles you. It makes your suffering feel more spacious, your problems less final. You start to think in terms of contribution instead of control. What can I offer? What energy do I bring? How do I show up if nothing is promised? That's Stoic character. Not flashy, not loud, but unbreakable, because it's been tested in the mind before it's tested in the world. And if you do this daily, even for a few minutes, you begin to carry that training into everything. Your tone changes, your posture changes, your choices become more deliberate, your tolerance for discomfort grows, your need to predict the future fades. You become present, not because you've escaped the worst, but because you've embraced the fact that it could happen. And still, you choose to show up, fully, calmly, without complaint. That's what simulating the end of the world teaches you, not how to avoid disaster, but how to remain yourself inside of it. And once you've done that, breakfast tastes better, not because the food changed, but because you did. After you've rehearsed the collapse of everything, after training your mind to meet the end of the world with calm instead of chaos, you come back to your ordinary life with a strange kind of awareness. Nothing around you has changed, and yet everything feels different. You begin to hear the sounds of the world with a sharper ear, not just noise, signals, patterns, invitations. Things that used to irritate or fade into the background now carry meaning. And when you've already faced the end, you're free to meet even the smallest details with curiosity instead of resistance. That's where the next layer of Stoic training begins, not in silence, but in sound. This practice is about reworking your relationship with everything you hear, not by shutting it out, but by decoding it, turning each sound into a Stoic lesson, a real-time opportunity to reframe how you perceive reality. It sounds absurd, and that's why it works, because absurdity removes your ego. It breaks your pattern. It catches you off guard just long enough for your mind to become present. This isn't meditation in a quiet room. It's meditation in the middle of your life. Start with the most obvious: irritation. The car alarm, the barking dog, The loud phone call on the train. Instead of tightening up, you translate. The dog bark becomes a lesson in persistence. The car horn becomes a lesson in urgency. The loud phone call becomes a reminder of how often we seek to be heard more than understood. You assign meaning, but not from emotion, from neutrality. This is sound mapping. You turn the world into a teaching tool, not in a poetic way, in a practical one. Because every sound is an opportunity to practice response over reaction. And most people spend their entire lives reacting to noise, to tone, to volume. They get stressed not by events, but by the energy the sounds around them trigger. They don't even realize how much noise shapes their internal state. The Stoic doesn't ignore sound. They train their response to it. They build a buffer between stimulus and story, and they use that space to choose clarity. Every time a new sound hits your ears, you have two choices: reject it or repurpose it. Most people reject. They flinch. They roll their eyes. They get tense. But when you repurpose, you shift the moment from resistance to reflection. That sudden knock at the door, practice for composure. That buzzing fridge, patience in discomfort. That dripping faucet, a lesson in how small irritations only grow when given attention. This doesn't mean you don't fix the faucet or ask for quiet when needed. It means you don't give your peace away every time sound enters your space. You treat each sound as a messenger. It's not good or bad, it just is. And your task is to meet it without collapsing into reaction. Eventually, your brain starts playing along. You hear a child screaming, not as a disturbance, but as a pure expression of unfiltered energy. You hear the ambulance siren and think, right now, someone's life is changing. You hear the buzz of your phone and use it as a trigger for a single breath instead of an immediate reach. Your soundscape becomes your dojo. Every moment an invitation to train presence, discipline, and detachment. This also rewires how you think about control. You realize how many sounds you don't control and how much energy you waste trying to suppress them. But when you let go of control, you gain composure. And composure is louder than any noise. You learn to let sounds pass through you like wind through open windows. Nothing sticks, nothing rattles. You remain centered while the world hums around you. This becomes a walking meditation, a commuting meditation, a waiting in line meditation, because there's always sound, and if there's always sound, there's always something to learn. You stop needing silence to be still. That's a myth. You just need awareness. You can sit in a crowded room and still be at peace if you've trained your ears to listen without judgment. This doesn't numb you. It awakens you. You hear more, not less. You hear the layers, the rhythm of a street, the tempo of conversation, the music in footsteps. And when you're present to it, you become more alive in your surroundings. This practice also trains you to stay neutral in communication, because the way people speak, the tone, the pace, the rhythm, can trigger you faster than their words. But if you've practiced staying composed through external noise, you're less likely to get pulled by internal ones. You learn to separate sound from story. The volume of someone's voice doesn't determine their intention. The sharpness of a word doesn't always mean harm. The silence in a reply isn't always rejection. Sound mapping helps you slow down. You notice how you fill in gaps with assumption, how you project meaning onto noise. But now you pause. You ask, what am I really hearing? And what am I adding? That pause is everything. It saves relationships. It prevents unnecessary conflict. It restores clarity when emotion tries to take over. And over time, your emotional system recalibrates. Loud doesn't mean danger. Quiet doesn't mean distance. Interruptions don't mean disrespect. They just mean life is unfolding. You begin to meet life on its terms, not by numbing your senses, but by sharpening them. Every sound becomes an anchor. The kettle whistles. You breathe. A door slams. You ground yourself. Your name is called. You return to your body. This is awareness in action, and it works because it's always available. You don't need a mantra. You don't need perfect conditions. You just need ears and the willingness to hear differently. The Stoics knew the world wouldn't cater to your comfort, so they trained for life as it is, not silent, not perfect, but full of lessons if you're willing to reframe them. That's what this is, a reframing machine. Noise into meaning, irritation into insight, chaos into training. It's absurd, but that's what makes it powerful, because absurdity breaks your old patterns, and what breaks your patterns gives you space to build new ones. The next time you're overwhelmed by noise, try it. Assign each sound a teaching, a reminder, a reflection, not to escape reality, but to shape your response to it. This is where discipline lives, not in isolation, but in the middle of the mess. You don't need the world to quiet down for you to find peace. You need to train your mind to hear differently. And when you do, nothing can disturb you, because everything becomes part of your practice, part of your growth, part of your inner quiet that no sound can shake. After training your ears to translate noise into wisdom, after learning to reframe every sound as a Stoic opportunity, your environment starts to feel different. The world no longer pulls your strings the way it used to. You stop reacting automatically. You begin to experience your life with more distance, more spaciousness, more clarity. And that's when you're ready for something even more radical. A deeper reset, not of sound, not of thought, but of self. This next practice isn't about controlling your reactions. It's about dissolving the person who reacts. It's about stepping outside the story of you for one entire day, not pretending to be someone else, not role-playing or detaching in anger, something quieter, stranger, more freeing. The practice of being a ghost in your own life for 24 hours. You live the day as if you've already died, but you're still here, watching, silently witnessing everything that unfolds, detached from control, detached from ownership. You don't speak to influence. You don't move to impress. You don't correct people's perception of you, because you're no longer the one they're looking at. You're gone. This life belongs to someone else now, and all you can do is observe. At first, it's uncomfortable. Your identity will protest. Your habits will push back. Your ego will whisper, "Say something. Be someone. Don't disappear." But that discomfort is the training, because everything that resists being unseen is the part of you that's still attached. Most people walk through life trying to be noticed, to be heard, to be relevant, even in small ways, choosing clothes, phrasing thoughts, adjusting behavior to match a role. But when you walk as a ghost, all of that drops. You're no longer curating your existence, you're witnessing it, without editing, without ego. The goal isn't numbness, it's observation. Stillness inside activity, presence without performance. You go through your routine. You eat, you work, you speak when required. But inwardly, you're not doing anything for identity. You're doing it as a quiet participant in a story that isn't about you anymore. This creates a strange kind of clarity. You start noticing how many of your actions are actually attempts to reinforce your role. You see how often you interrupt moments to leave a mark, to be remembered, to matter. But when you're a ghost, none of that matters. There's no one to impress, no one to explain yourself to, not even you. You stop inserting your opinion into every conversation. You stop subtly performing while you speak. You stop shaping your narrative in real time. You just act, move, let the moment unfold without grasping. This reveals just how loud your ego has been. Because even in quiet people, the internal identity is constantly narrating, planning, managing how they'll be seen. But when that narrator is silenced, when you choose to remove the I from the center of the frame, you begin to experience peace without needing to win anything. This also changes how you see time. Most people live like they're sprinting through a narrow window, trying to make every hour meaningful, trying to maximize their identity's impact. But when you live as a ghost, time softens. You stop trying to grip every minute. You let the day move around you, and you begin to experience the present moment not as something to conquer, but as something to watch. You'll start to notice details you've missed 1,000 times. How your hands move, how people pause before speaking, how often you interrupt or seek validation. As a ghost, you don't need to jump in. You don't need to control the pace. You just observe. And in that space, presence deepens. This detachment also gives you emotional insight. You feel emotions rise, but you don't grab them. You don't act on them. You watch them like weather. Anger comes. You notice it. You let it move through without identifying as angry. Sadness passes. You feel it, but you don't turn it into a story. You're just here, not fixing, not avoiding, just being. And that's the heart of this practice, being without becoming. The Stoics talked constantly about detachment, not as avoidance, but as perspective. They didn't want you to abandon your humanity. They wanted you to stop mistaking it for your essence. Living as a ghost makes that visible, because the longer you go without reinforcing I, the more clearly you see what doesn't need you to hold it. You don't need to be the center of every decision. You don't need to leave your fingerprint on every room. You don't need to be remembered to feel real. This way of moving also brings compassion, because when you stop trying to control how you're seen, you start seeing others more clearly. You notice how hard they're trying, how much they're performing, how heavy their identities are, and instead of judging, you feel empathy. You understand, because you've carried it too. But not today. Today you walk through the world like a ghost, light, detached, awake, not silent in a bitter way, silent in a grounded way, not hiding from life, merging with it. You respond when spoken to, you complete your tasks, you show up fully, but not to be impressive, not to defend your role, not to be seen. You show up because presence is the point, not self. This practice also teaches surrender, because when you stop managing your image, you realize how little control you actually had to begin with. People think what they think. Events unfold the way they will. Your attempts to guide everything were illusions, and when those illusions fall, you're not helpless, you're free. You stop resisting what you can't change. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop needing to prove your worth in every room, because today there's nothing to prove. The you who used to need that proof is already gone. What's left is awareness. That's all. By the end of the 24 hours, you'll feel different. Not because something dramatic happened, but because you've experienced yourself without the usual weight. You've seen your life unfold without grabbing at it. You've watched people interact with your shell without trying to adjust their perception. You've let the day happen without trying to be someone inside it. And in that stillness, something opens, a deeper knowing, a quiet strength. You realize you can return to your roles tomorrow, but now you don't need them to survive. You can speak again with purpose, act again with alignment, engage again with energy. But now there's space between you and the story. You're no longer lost in the performance. You're aware of the actor, the costume, the stage, and the stillness behind it all. That stillness is where Stoicism lives. Not in your image, not in your success, not in your name, in your presence when all those things are stripped away. And once you've met it, even for a day, you'll never be able to lie to yourself again. You'll know who you are without your story, and that truth is unshakable. After 3 hours of mental rewiring, of peeling back layers of thought, comfort, ego, and illusion, you're not quite the same person who pressed play. That version of you, the one gripping tightly to identity, addicted to validation, rattled by sound, caught in the race for purpose, has loosened their grip. Because what you've just experienced wasn't just absurd, it was intentional. Absurdity was the doorway. From losing on purpose, to assigning personalities to your coffee mug, to imagining conversations with your own corpse, to mentally setting the world on fire before breakfast. Each lesson dismantled something, a belief, a reflex, a mental pattern so old it felt like truth. And underneath all of that noise, you found something quieter, something steadier, something real. You found that still point in the middle of chaos. You discovered that strength isn't built in grand victories, but in tiny choices made in silence, like eating burnt toast without flinching, or standing in front of a mirror until your own face becomes unfamiliar, or walking through the day like a ghost, watching your life unfold without trying to steer it. You didn't just learn Stoic theory, you practiced it, mentally, emotionally, absurdly. And now you know. You don't have to react to everything. You don't have to hold on to your preferences like lifelines. You don't have to be the center of the story to feel complete. You've trained your mind to be less impressed with pleasure, less disturbed by pain, and less confused by praise. You've broken the illusion that your worth depends on being right, being seen, or being in control. And you did it by leaning into what most people would avoid: discomfort, absurdity, stillness, death, irrelevance, failure. That's the heart of Stoicism. Not standing above life like a statue, but moving through it with such calm clarity that nothing can possess you, not even yourself. This wasn't 3 hours of philosophy. This was 3 hours of becoming less reactive, less fragile, less dependent on things going your way, and more capable of living fully even when they don't. So what now? Now you carry it forward, not with perfection, but with practice. You eat the toast without complaint. You listen to noise without tension. You lose with grace. You win without arrogance. You walk through your life like a visitor, present, grateful, unafraid, because you've seen that everything you were afraid to face, the discomfort, the silence, the endings, the loss of control, they aren't the enemy. The real enemy was your resistance to them. And once you stop resisting, you start living. Now here's your part in this. If any moment in these 3 hours shifted something inside you, even just a thought, a question, a breath, I want to hear it. What lesson hit hardest? What absurd idea actually made sense to you? What practice are you going to try tomorrow? Drop it in the comments. Your insight could be the exact sentence someone else needs to read tonight. Don't underestimate the ripple of a few honest words. This is more than a video. It's a conversation with people who are ready to stop living on autopilot, and you're a part of that. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this isn't the end. It's the start of something deeper. We're going to keep going down the rabbit hole of wisdom, clarity, and mental strength. And if you want to build a mind that stays still in storms and sees beauty in the breakdown, then this is where you need to be. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for staying with it. Thank you for being the kind of person who doesn't settle for shallow answers. You are now one of the rare few who knows the truth. Stoicism isn't stiff or boring or distant. It's raw, it's personal, it's absurd, and it's powerful enough to change the way you see the world forever. Now go live like it. Calm, clear, untouchable.